10-4 drivers, welcome to the Channel 19 Experience Trucker Podcast. This is where the real stories roll, straight from the blacktop.
Breaker 19, villains, you got your ears on. I'm your host, Tony. Welcome to the Trucker Podcast. It's Sunday, June 29th. Whoa, pretty much half the year is in the books. That's amazing. And it's episode number 19 this week. In the pre-trip this week, we've got a bulletin board item from Koolhand Danny C with a story he shared this past week from his friend, Pat Hill. And we've also got a letter from Down Under titled Breaking Point, talking about the state of trucking in Australia. And we'll do a little contrast and comparison with how we feel things are going here in the USA. In the money line this week, I'm going to build off some of those breaking point thoughts and roll that up with a new character that I thought of this week, Dieseldamus. Kind of like Nostradamus, only forecasting and prognosticating the diesel world, the trucking world. And we'll talk about what I'm seeing as some of the moves as the market shift, as the government shifts, and what the longer term impacts of that are likely to be. In the interview this week, I've got Todd Waldron joining us. He's the Vice President of Carrier Experience at truckstop.com. And we'll talk about his career in trucking and the latest features being released on truckstop.com. Don't forget to hang on after the interview for the post-trib. Let's get this rig rolling. If you're not driving, it's a great time to like, follow, subscribe, and share the podcast with your friends.
Paper breaker 19, can I get a radio check? Pretty quiet out here on Channel 19. Well, there's a plain white rapper taking pictures at the state line. Hit the jake brake quick, we ain't paying no fines. The driver swing into the interstate, body shop south at exit 5. Building trucking ain't the same as it was. We're the last of our kind.
At the Mid-America Truck Show, I had the fortune to meet up with Mike Barber, founder of Truckers Wealth. Both of us have a passion for understanding the uniqueness of truckers and sharing our knowledge wherever we can. Mike is a seasoned financial professional. He has over 20 years of dedicated experience serving the trucking industry. Truckers Wealth has created a specialized financial hub where truckers can receive expert advice and tailored solutions to build wealth, minimize taxes, and secure lifetime income for themselves and their families. Check out his website, truckers-wealth.com, and look forward to seeing him on the program here soon. Grab that safety vest and let's go do our pre-trip. Let's kick things off with a quote. I try to get into routine. I've done a couple quotes before, and I try to be consistent, but I'm a little bit incorrigible. And, Danger Dave talked about the proper steps of decoupling an RGN so that you don't do anything damaging. I tend to struggle with following a routine at times. And therefore, I've had a few glad hand dents in the back of my cab over the years to prove that point. But let's try again this week. This week, the quote is from Agnès Nin. She's a French-American writer from the early 20th century. And the quote goes like this: "We don't see things as they are. We see them as we are." We don't see things as they are. We see them as we are. Let's let that one marinate a little bit. I'm going to touch on that a couple times this week in the podcast. We don't see things as they are. We see them as we are. First up on the pre-trip, we've got a bulletin board item this week from Facebook and from someone I've mentioned before on the podcast, Danny C, aka Koolhand. Danny's a veteran, Vietnam War veteran, former trucker, author of several books and countless stories about his trucking days, his life in general, but also a lot of the stories revolve around trucking and his experiences. He's retired from trucking now, but he's still the mayor down in Turnip Hill, Alabama. I'll share his social links out. And he's old school, bona fide old school trucker. This week he shared something written by a friend of his, Pat Hill. She wrote it a few years back, he said, and I wanted to share it all with you. She's passed on now, but I thought this piece that she wrote for Danny gave some lovely and poignant insights into the trucking life, especially the trucking life of maybe years gone by, but definitely touches on the reality still of trucking. It's called Truckers and Trucker Wives by Pat Hill. I can tell you a few things. Back in the day, before cell phones, we had landlines and CB radios. Wives only heard from their trucking guys once a day at best. More so, it was every few days, if at all, until he blew that air horn as he was pulling in at home. We learned how to handle problems and make decisions. It got embarrassing to call his dispatcher to get a message to him that the car won't start, the washer is leaking, or the baby is sick. So we learned how to fix things, or to get them fixed, so that by the time he called to give instructions or advice, we had already dealt with that problem and had another one. Now, I'm not saying that our problem solving or fixes were always the best options. Nevertheless, that's what we did. We couldn't get a hold of him somewhere between here and Southern California. Then when you did get home with your nasty diesel smelling self, multiple loads of dingy, smelly, greasy laundry that had to be done in 2 days or less, we were so glad to see him. But go take a shower. Sometimes it took more than one to get rid of the diesel smell. It was always better to get that glad you're home sex over with before you started talking about home problems, or give him that honey-do list. After the return of the breadwinner was celebrated and the money changed hands for the bills, and there was never enough to go around, next trip we can pay for that. It was time for him to load up into that big rig with all that chrome freshly shined and put himself into that air seat and blow that horn again. He's off. Now, did I leave out the part about scrubbing the interior of that grease magnet on the wheels, sparkling up the windows inside and out, and making that sleeper feel as comfy as home? Or better yet, him teaching me where the grease fittings were under that 40-foot trailer, because it would be easier for me to get to them? We both should have been on the payroll because it was a joint venture. I went with him sometimes, merely out of boredom. I got my license. It was easy to do back then. Drove on the interstate at night. Nothing ever passed me. He slept for those hours. Another of my contributions to make his job easier. When he was between jobs or home for a long, he started to want to tell me what to do and be the boss. Hey, I was doing just fine at that role. Now we're going to disagree. I hated for him to leave home mad or upset, so I always made up with him before he left, because I really did love him, both of my husbands. I didn't want bad juju with him in that truck. That was Truckers and Trucker Wives by Pat Hill. Thanks for sharing, Danny. That sure brings back a lot of memories of what it was like for many of us as kids with trucker parents. And it makes me think of a comment I read on another post this week. The post was on Reddit, was a young driver, not sure if this whole OTR thing was for them. And one of the comments was, you need to figure out if you're a truck driver or a trucker. The commenter didn't flesh out what they meant, but I think we've all got an idea of what they probably meant. You know, a truck driver does this as a job, an occupation. It's a transaction. It has boundaries. A trucker, on the other hand, it's who they are. All of it. The good, the bad. Pat and her husbands were truckers. If you've read any of Danny's stories, you know he was a trucker, and his wife as well. I think I was a trucker for a little while. The years that I've been sharing up until now on the podcast, and for a few more years of stories that I'll tell, I was a trucker. My second stint behind the wheel, I tried to put trucking in the box of truck driver. And even though I owned the truck and bought the fuel and owned the plates and whatever other arbitrary definitions that people want to argue about on Facebook, including me sometimes, about what's owner operator, leased operator, company driver, right? Regardless of which role you play in that spectrum, there's always been this love-hate relationship that we all have with trucking. And that's okay. Rarely is anything that big in a person's life as simple as black or white or love or hate. Danger Dave talked about it some last week when he was talking about his challenges. And even Verlin touched on it, I think a couple of episodes before that, right? The feeling of watching a sunrise come up, that you know how much went into earning being able to see that sunrise that morning, or just some of the beautiful things that we get to see. But contrast that with the days like, or the weeks like Danger Dave had, breakdowns, challenges, nothing going right, one thing after another. But one of the beautiful things in Pat's story to me is that unwritten acceptance of the reality, the choice made, right? The choice made that meant if I love him, then I love all the things that come with it. And that includes trucking because he's a trucker. And her writing was very real. It explained the reality of things in ways that really make them resonate. And it wasn't littered with griping. We all know that there's underneath those stories, there was a ton of work, physical work, pain, sadness, people leaving and returning, and all the challenges that go with it. But kind of what broke through to me was the realness of the little things and how Pat described them. What it felt like to smell those diesel fumes when Dad made it home and gave us a hug. What it felt like to wait for that phone call at night. And what it felt like when that phone call didn't come. And you wondered when it would come and why it hadn't come. And trying to push down those worries, knowing all the bad things that could go wrong. And I was just a kid. I didn't even realize all the bad things that could go wrong. But I could see the worry in my mom's face. And it made me think back to that quote. We don't see things as they are. We see them as we are. I was a kid. It's a different experience for my mom as a wife, as a co-venture owner in that trucking enterprise. I couldn't know what it was like for her on all those aspects. I could only see it as I was, not knowing what to do when the phone call doesn't come, how long to wait, what do you do? In that age, it was very different. I mean, now you blow up somebody's phone and they have 57 missed calls. Back then, there was no one to call except the choice to, do I call dispatch? Do I raise the alarm bells? Do I call and see if they've heard from your husband or wife? Have they delivered the load? What was the plan? Were they supposed to be somewhere? Are they just taking a nap and didn't want to go find a place to make a phone call as they're waiting to do a night delivery? Or what happened, right? There's 1,000 things that could have went on and there was no way to communicate them. But the reality was in that era, dispatch probably didn't even know any more than she did. Sometimes the dispatch, we'd call their wives and have you heard from them? So it's really a great story that in so few words can resonate so many different feelings and emotions. So rest in peace, Pat. Thank you for the story that you shared with Danny. Danny, thank you for sharing it with us. I'll share out some links so y'all can see that and read it for yourself. Also to Danny's page. He's got a lot of great stories. I've read one of his books so far, working on the second one. The one I've read is called What Is It With Me? And it's a journal style book of Danny just telling a bunch of stories through his growing up and through his experiences in Vietnam and then starting off in his trucking journey after that. Great book, fun book. Without using 1,000 words, Danny can put his finger on the feeling of the moment and sharing that with you. Some of them are easier to understand than others, right? I think you have to live some of those things to be able to feel it in that way. But when he hits on it, man, it really hits home. Finally, on the pre-trip, let's dig into something a little heavier on the industry side. A 4-page white paper rolled across my dashboard this week. Written not by a politician, not by a journalist, but by a trucker. A working man named Brendon Ryan out of Australia. Now, Brendon isn't just some armchair observer to the trucking industry. He's a seasoned former driver, a compliance expert, and managing partner at ProDrive Compliance Group, which he co-founded back in 2013. His company helps fleets across Australia navigate all the regulations. So, in other words, he doesn't just know the rules, he knows how they impact the real world in trucking operations. And if that wasn't enough street cred, Brendon also co hosts the Copy Southbound podcast. Their podcast dives deep into the stories of Australia's hardest working drivers and transport legends. It's the kind of show that makes you be proud to be a trucker no matter where in the world you're a trucker. I met them for a minute down in Kentucky at Matt's, and really nice guys. Messaged back and forth with them quite a bit. And just great all around trucking folks. So when somebody who's been in this business as long as Brendon has takes the time to put together 4 pages of hard-earned truth on paper, something he called the breaking point, it makes a person sit down, take a minute, and read it. I'll post the letter on Facebook so you can dig into all the details for yourself. But here's the short of it. And this isn't fluff. This is a warning. Hopefully it's a wake-up call. And not just for folks down under. Because what he's describing, we all know it's been happening here too. Like, this is our reality. In the paper, he lays out the crisis brewing in Australia's transport industry. And it's like looking in the mirror for us. He talks about a mass exodus of skilled truckers. Folks walking away from the job, burned out, worn down, disrespected, and the next generation trying to come into the industry. There's not a ton of people fighting to get in. And can any of us blame them? Right? We're asking new drivers to jump through thousands of hoops, spend thousands of dollars on training, and then join a world of low pay, cutthroat pay, brutal delivery schedules. We got beeping and vibrating gadgets all over the cab, and dispatchers and machines barking at them like drill sergeants. He also writes about how small companies are drowning in regulation, not smart safety rules. Those matter. We need smart safety rules. But what they're dealing with down there is bloated, overlapping mandates that feel more like paperwork completion exercises than a plan to actually impact safety positively. Sound familiar? Here in the US, we're not short on rules. What we're short on is smart rules and efficiency. Every year there's another layer, new software, new inspection protocols, new compliance traps. The problem isn't regulation itself. There's always been some level of regulation, I mean, at least for 100 years. It's regulation that's inefficient, inconsistent, disconnected from the real world. Policies that treat trucking companies like they're the enemy instead of the backbone of the economy that we are. And let's not make a mistake about this. Everyone pays for this mess. Every delay, every redundant safety check, every dollar wasted on compliance theater, that cost rolls downhill and it hits the grocery store shelf. It hits the Walmart shelves, the Target shelves, the Amazon shelves. Everywhere everyone spends money, it hits their pocketbook. And it lands the hardest on small trucking companies and independent carriers, single truck operations, right? The overhead of regulation is disproportionate to bear on the smaller carriers. And the reality is, when trucking breaks down, when trucking's inefficient, America slows down. But interestingly, this week, there was a ray of hope in the United States. U.S. Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy dropped into the What the Truck podcast. So shout out to Tim Dooner over there. on that show. He did an awesome job with the interview. I'll post a link to that episode. Again, I already did earlier this week when it first came out, I think on Friday. And Tim and Secretary Duffy talked about something that might sound familiar. It was a little topic, but Secretary Duffy talked about updating the DOT website. Now, it doesn't seem like much, not a headliner, right? Won't make your Google News feed, but we've got a system that is clinging to the 90s harder than faded blue jeans and hairspray. And so, even a little progress towards modernization is a step in the right direction, and let's keep shoving them along. Secretary Duffy talked about improving transparency, making tools that are actually usable, building systems that serve people that depend on them, drivers, safety managers, dispatchers, everybody involved in the transportation industry. Now, hopefully that talk turns into action. I mean, if we've seen anything over the last, we're going on 6 months, they're getting some things done. You may not like all of them, but they're having an impact and they're not afraid to move and kind of fight through the malaise that is Washington. So maybe we're starting to see Washington realize that government doesn't just have the right to regulate us. And we've kind of went through some administrations that really embrace their right to regulate us. But what goes along with that right is always an obligation, and the obligation and responsibility is that the government does it efficiently. And because all this comes down to balance, regulation and market forces have to walk together. You need safety, you need profit, you need worker pay, you need service, you need affordability. But when any one of those metrics gets overvalued or an organization gets overly focused on one of those metrics, when safety becomes an excuse to crush profitability, when profit becomes an excuse to crush fair wages, the whole system starts to shake. And when it gets too far out of balance, the wheels start to come off. But it's possible to strike a balance for the industry, for the regulators, the shippers, the drivers, all to get a seat at the table and create a freight ecosystem that works for everybody. And we're all part of the consuming public. So when all of that happens, when we have balance, we all win. The non-truck driving consumers as well as us truck drivers. And it keeps us competitive, scalable, and stable. So go check out the paper that Brendon wrote. Thank you, Brendon, for putting it down and speaking the truth from your perspective down there and sharing what it's like to be in Australia. He called it the breaking point for a reason. And that title doesn't just belong in Australia. We're seemingly walking ourselves back a little bit, stepping away, relieving some pressure from the breaking point that I think everybody was feeling. And let's be fair, everybody who was still in the game was feeling because we'd lost a lot of folks. But we're thankfully getting some relief. And so Godspeed to our Aussie trucking brothers and sisters out there and to everybody else. Whether you're hauling steel out of Gary, produce out of Fresno, or oil field gear out of the Permian, our voices matter. It took a while. It took a hell of a long time. But we got some folks who are willing to press some buttons and move some things along in there right now. And we'll see how it turns out. I'll talk a little bit about that in the next section of the podcast. Like, where does this all go now that we see some buttons getting pressed and some things moving? How do we prepare for changes that occur because of that? But make sure to share your voice. Keep writing. Keep speaking up. If we want to keep this machine running scalably, stably, competitively, we've got to listen to the folks like you, like Brendon, the people who live it every day, every mile. We need Washington to do things. But real change, smart change doesn't happen or start off in Washington. People in business suits discuss what happens and they influence what's going to happen. But the men and women in work boots make things happen. That's the pre-trip for this week. No defects detected. But that's just my opinion. If you find some defects, let us know. Reach out. Shoot us an email. Hit the contact us button on the website. Get that seat adjusted. Let's push the buttons in. We've got work to do. Trans Carolina Permits is based out of North Carolina. They've been in business since 1977, and they've got a team with a ton of experience in all of our favorite part of trucking, which of course is the government. They provide a portfolio of services for the trucking industry, not to mention they have a compliance program. They'll help you with clearinghouse setup and queries, IFTA, and mileage reporting, so your state-by-state mileage, your fuel purchase tracking, and get that wrapped up into a nice little bundle for quarterly filings. They're a one-stop shop for your trucking needs. You can find them on Facebook and LinkedIn, or check out their website, transcarolinapermits.com, or give them a call at 1-800-899-4870.
It's by truckers for truckers. This is the Channel 19 Experience. Let's hit the road.
Welcome back. Let's pop it up to line 3 here and knock out the money line this week. We talked in the pre-trip about the breaking point and how we're walking back in some respects from our own breaking point here in the U.S. trucking market. But in the money line this week, I wanted to take an alternative view. Now let's zoom out for a second. We've been riding through a persistent inflationary cycle ever since COVID. One that's pushed prices up and kept them stuck there. Everything from groceries to gear oil costs more. Interest rates, they've been cranked up in an effort to slow things down. But what they've really done is make big ticket items like houses, cars, semi-trucks downright unreachable for a lot of people. You want to upgrade your equipment? Good luck. And financing, it's a whole different animal than it was 5 years ago. And for small fleets, owner-operators, that pressure is real and rising. If you're in the household mover segment, you've felt this pain even sharper. People aren't moving. Folks are locked into their homes with 2 to 3% mortgages from 2020. And with home prices sky high and interest rates 6-7%, who can afford to move right now? If they're in a house, they're staying put. And if they're not, they're priced out of it. That means fewer loads, fewer contracts, and another entire slice of trucking left sitting still and reorganizing. And let's not kid ourselves. We're not out of the woods yet. We're just starting to clear the brush at the edge of the forest. Now, this past week, we saw the beginning of enhanced enforcement of the English language proficiency standards. Now, some folks are going to cry foul, but let's call it what it is. Basic safety. If you can't read a road sign, a low clearance warning, an emergency instruction on a sign, you shouldn't be behind the wheel of an 80,000-pound truck. Hell, you probably shouldn't even be behind the wheel of a 2,000-pound car at times, like I talked about a couple weeks back in my Waymo experience. Like, this isn't about politics. It's about putting a stop to the demolition derby on our highways. And right alongside that, Secretary Duffy announced the DOT will begin auditing all non-domiciled CDLs. That's foreign-based drivers holding U.S. licenses through third-party loopholes. It's a cleanup move, one aimed at restoring integrity in part of the system that's been exploited for years. We've got drivers on U.S. roads who were never properly vetted, never verified, never trained to U.S. standards. And it's not just unfair to the industry, it's dangerous. But those tactical things aside, it's not just all sunshine and steering wheels here. The industry's been in a down cycle for 3 years, and just when it looked like the bottom was behind us, we added in tariffs, global trade tension, poured more weight onto an already slow-moving recovery. Freight rates are still weak, and it seemed like it's been death by 1,000 paper cuts. And now we're hearing new pressure on the immigration front, too. The Trump administration's renewed its focus on illegal immigration and deportation. This is going to ripple hard across industries that depend on low-wage labor. Agriculture, warehousing, local freight. So yeah, there's a lot of moving parts and a lot of unknowns going on right now. We've got the big, beautiful bill awaiting passage. I haven't checked in the last couple hours to see if that thing's moved at all, but it's looming on the horizon. And there's a lot of stuff baked into 941 pages worth of governmentese. What we've got is an economy overall that's still in a pretty fragile and precarious situation. At times, the numbers look okay from 30,000 foot, but down here on the ground, when you look past some of these tactical improvements, there's a storm brewing on the horizon. Now, I could sit here and drone on, lay this all out for myself, but sometimes when the fog gets a little thick in my head and the static gets loud, I'm going to have to hand the mic over to a different part of me. The part of me that's a little bit older, a little bit meaner, and a little bit less filtered. Maybe you could call him my alter ego. Maybe it's just a defense mechanism, might be a psychological break, but born from years of watching this industry eat its own at times and somehow keep rolling, I've got an alternative personality that I'll introduce, and I'm going to call him Dieseldamus. Don't worry, I don't have a Karnak the Magnificent turban, not yet anyway, but Dieseldamus, he doesn't need costumes or crystal balls, even if we might add him in later for fun. He's not a Wall Street analyst. He's not some policy wonk you're going to see on MSNBC. He doesn't have an alphabet soup of credentials after his name. He's my diesel-soaked other half, the voice that shows up when the chrome dreams start rusting and the CB static starts telling stories. He sees patterns, he smells cycles, he makes gut calls, and up next, he's going to drop the hammer and lay out what I really think about what all this really means. So welcome, Dieseldamus, to the chat. Here's the reality. This economy ain't healthy. It's being held together with duct tape and deferred payments. And the one thing that it can't take right now is a freight rate spike. We've already lost capacity over the last 3 years. Companies downsized, some folded. Rates stayed low because the system quietly leaned on drivers that shouldn't have been here. Folks without English proficiency, questionable CDLs, cross-border loopholes. The Biden administration didn't talk about it, but they leaned into it to help cool inflation. That cheap labor cushioned the blow. But now the cushion's getting yanked. Enforcement's here. Audits are coming. Cabotage is under the spotlight. And once that capacity's stripped out, rates are going to climb fast. And this capacity purge didn't start with enforcement. It's already started out of the fear of enforcement. In April, almost 7,500 trucking companies shut down, a 12-month high, and a 26% jump from March. Net DOT authority revocations are now averaging 1,500 plus per week, the fastest since the early COVID collapse. Essentially, the market is self-correcting again, not through bankruptcies, but through quiet exits. Outfits skating on limited English, non-domiciled CDLs and cabotage know their numbers about up. That's people getting out before the hammer drops. And with that hidden freight capacity disappearing ahead of schedule, spot rates, they're starting to come up. Tender rejections are already ticking upward. In May, the rejection index passed 6.6%. You've probably heard it on other podcasts or other sources. That's up a couple percentage points from just a couple months ago. But the reality is, this economy can't take it. Prices are already too high. Tariffs added pressure. Interest rates have locked buyers out of capital. Add a freight rate hike to that, and what you're going to end up with is the last straw on an overloaded camel. During COVID, freight could go to the moon because everybody was sitting on government money. COVID grants, PPP loans, but those days are gone. Now, every added cent hits the end consumer, and they're already running on fumes. So what I see, what Dieseldamus sees is rates going up and the squeeze beginning. And the squeeze is coming for the consumer, and the consumer is a weak link. It lays a trap for the government. And here's the trap. Higher freight rates mean higher prices. and the consumer's already bleeding out. Credit card debt hit $1.3 trillion, according to the New York Fed. That's a record, and not the kind of record you want to make. Delinquencies have spiked to a 12-year high. 12.3% of cardholders behind on payments. Auto delinquencies are up too, particularly for subprime borrowers. Real wages stagnant or declining in most sectors. The COVID cash masked this pain for a while, but now it's starting to hit like a freight train. Look at rents. Average rent in America is reached 40 to 50% of gross income, and that's just not sustainable. And freight rates aren't going to be the only thing added to inflation here. The new immigration enforcement that Trump has ramped up over the last 6 months, it is going to continue to expand, and the ripple effects are going to hit hard. When agriculture loses labor, food prices go up. When construction loses labor, housing costs go up. You can't yank 1 million workers out of the backbone of the economy and expect prices to just stand still. The labor wasn't just cheap, it was essential, and now it's gone. And you're going to feel that at the pump, at the store, and at the back of every warehouse. And so I predict consumer pullout's not going to be gradual. It's going to be sharp. It's going to be sharp like that jolt when you're pull starting someone and they've got it in first gear, and there's going to be a reaction. Shippers are going to respond with cuts. They're going to stop buying, which means freight's going to slow down starting at the port, just like with tariffs. And you're going to watch freight volume drop like a transmission without any fluid in it. Now, it's not going to happen overnight. And like I've said, there's going to be a good run, but it's going to burn fast and hot. And here's what happens next. People forget trucking doesn't just move freight for factories and farms and warehouses. It moves stuff for people with paychecks. And as the inflation numbers creep and the prices rise, we're going to continue to see a trend that's been going on for a little while under the radar, which is a white-collar recession. We're already seeing it in tech, finance, logistics, e-commerce. These are discretionary spenders that keep the middle of this freight market alive. Now, truckers may not cry for the cubicle crowd, right? But when their cards start getting declined, freight stops moving. And those people don't have jobs, they stop buying, and we stop hauling. What I predict is those are some of the first sectors we're going to start to see that discretionary spending start to get hammered here. Collapses in apparel, home goods, office supplies, electronics. And then this is when the trap fully springs. The Federal Reserve is stuck. Full stop. They don't have any options that they like. There's no wiggle room. If they cut rates, it's like dumping gasoline on inflation. If they raise rates, they'll collapse demand even further and trigger a deeper recession, bankruptcies, business closures. If they do nothing, inflation just stays sticky and this pain continues. It's like starting off with a blunt force trauma that just turns into a continuous slow bleed. So it's a pick your poison moment for the government and the Federal Reserve. Heart attack or stroke. And here's the kicker. The government already used its shadow subsidy by allowing under-the-radar truckers and cabotage to artificially keep freight cheap. Now that the enforcement is public and political, I don't think we see Trump turning back on this. And that's what an inflation trap looks like. You're boxed in, and now the box is on fire. So what are some signs that good old Dieseldamus has made good predictions here? Well, first thing we're going to see is the rise of freight prices. And we're already starting to see that. It doesn't take a genius to predict that we start rounding up drivers and shipping them out or taking away their CDLs that freight prices should go up. So we'll start to see that here. All the indicators are pointing that direction. And that's the indicator that we've entered the eye of the hurricane. But then start watching things like inflation numbers, especially as the freight rates go up, and not BS government inflation numbers or consumer price index numbers. Because a lot of those bake out things like energy cost. We'll know it's hitting when the freight rates start getting good, because every dollar we make in trucking comes at the expense of a consumer somewhere, because the shippers aren't eating all these costs. It may get billed back to the shipper, but it just gets baked right into the cost of goods sold. So watch for the numbers and be careful to watch the real numbers. Also, the government numbers are lag behind. The government's very good at creating some metrics that don't mean a darn thing. But also their numbers are far behind. Like they're not tracking in real time. And they go back and revise things, typically for the worse, after they publicly state how good it is. As the saying goes, there's liars, damned liars, and statisticians. So take the statistics with a grain of salt. And then you're going to start to see some cracks in other places like the stock market. We see the quarterly filings coming out of the stock market. There's always a delay to them, right? They're reporting about what just happened. Usually there's a month or so delay just to accumulate the numbers. And then there's the shenanigans of what they do with the numbers before they ever get to Wall Street. But what you'll start to see is some things showing up in the headlines, and they won't be popular opinion because the numbers will still be going up, right? When inflation goes up, your sales numbers goes up, just like in trucking, right? If the freight rates go up, your top line gross revenue goes up. But if fuel goes up and all your other expenses go up, it didn't really help you any. But the immediate impact is the numbers are going to look good, but then they're not. And the speculators are going to know that out in front. So you're going to start to see their bets start to move first. And what I really think is going to be the telltale indicator of the crap really starting to hit the proverbial fan is the big trucking interests will start to ramp up their rhetoric. And what I mean by that is when freight rates go high, we're going to start to see the chants of old. The driver shortage headlines will start to appear. And behind that, behind those headlines, will be the lobbyists fighting for things that we've seen time and time again. While the headlines say driver shortage, what they'll be trying to get past is lowering the CDL age to 18. Longer trailers, heavier trailers, expanded hours of service exemptions, preemption of various state level labor and wage protections, fast tracking driverless trucks, subsidized driver training pipelines, aka taxpayer funded labor. All signs that the trap is already sprung and now the wolves are circling and the government is willing to chew off its own leg to do anything to try to get out of the trap. Sounds pretty gloomy, right? I promised unfiltered. Dieseldamus doesn't pull punches. But I've been thinking about this and I've been watching the various government shenanigans over the years. Sorry, Cal, had to steal your line. Trying to see if there's still a rabbit left in their hat. And frankly, I don't see a hat, let alone a rabbit. The government, they've pulled off surprise rescues before. During COVID, they broke out the global money printing machine and showed just how coordinated, creative, and desperate world powers can get when collapse is on the line. But in this case, reversing enforcement is politically impossible. Trump's just not going down that road. He's not going to open up the border in the other direction. He's not going to turn the planes around and fill them back up. Subsidizing freight is fiscally reckless at a level we've never seen before. And all just so people can buy more stuff that they can't afford and that our government can't afford to subsidize. Like, it's one thing to do that for things like heating oil to keep people warm, but to do it for iPhones and crap off of Temu, I don't see anybody having the political fortitude, especially Republicans, to go down that path. Now, is there something to be said for improving efficiency in transportation? Is it possible? Yes, we all know how much inefficiency there is. But the problem is, technology is not going to save us in transportation. Deadhead miles, they're not getting fixed by fancy dashboards. Shippers aren't going to magically stop causing detention. Now, don't get me wrong. We need all these tools to reduce friction as fast as we can get them, right? Anything would be better. But they're not magic. And we're going to talk to Todd Waldron here in a minute from truckstop.com. He's the VP of Carrier Services over there, about some of their new features. And there's a lot of great stuff in there that helps minimize effort, reduce friction, eliminate fraud, make sure you're doing business with people you want to be doing business with, all kinds of things like that. All of it helps, don't get me wrong. But efficiency via technology can smooth an edge, but it's not going to revamp the entire industry overnight and keep the price inflation of lack of trucking supply from having an impact. There's no magic, there's no rabbit in the hat. And also, the world's not going to go for another synchronized currency devaluation stunt again. There's no globally coordinated bailout waiting backstage like COVID. The magic's gone. This time the math is real and it's brutal. So, what am I recommending? What's the call to action here? Well, this is a moment of clarity to think about what your future actions are going to be. This boom is going to feel like a comeback, but it's bait. Like I said before, this is the eye of the storm. The other storm wall is coming. If you're making a profit right now, or you're going to start making a profit here soon as rates start to uptick, save it. Be responsible with it. Don't overexpand. Don't fall for fake upcycles. And by all means, get your books in a row. I've said it before. Hopefully, you hear it in other places. Understand your numbers. Watch your costs like a hawk. Invest in efficiency, whether that's technology or something else. How you do your processes, how you run your business. Many businesses make the mistake of when times are good, they care less about efficiency because they're already making more money than they usually do. It usually takes investment to get more efficient. And when times are hard, their capital's being sucked up in all other directions and they don't have any left to invest in getting more efficient. And so you're stuck and your only choice is really brute force, right? Pour more effort onto it. So get ahead of that. Take some of the profitability that it's about to come and invest it in getting more efficient. And then finally, keep an eye on your investments. There's going to be a run up, but there's going to be a decline coming right behind it that's likely to be steep and harsh. You look at some of the greatest declines in Wall Street came right after what seemed to be really good times. It hits like a ton of bricks and it goes deep and it hits hard. Get a financial advisor. I talk about truckers' wealth. That's one source, but make sure somebody's looking after you and your money. Make sure you know where the hell your passwords are because you may need to make decisions quickly. Don't worry about timing the market at the top or the bottom. It's always better to be a day early before a hard run like this down than being a day late. And just to be clear, this is not a sky is falling, chicken little moment. This isn't going to happen overnight. This takes time to unfold, and we'll watch for other things that either are accelerants that get thrown onto these various scenarios. There's also a big difference between what Washington talks about doing and what actually happens on the ground. So we'll watch for that to see what the gap is between what they say is being enforced and what actually happens. So you have time. And like I said, there's going to be a good run up here. Just be cautious about how you react and buy into the run up because there's some inescapable realities coming for the economy. It's kind of like standing on the beach and you're knee deep and the waves are coming in and you watch the waves and you kind of move accordingly, right? You can see a little bit bigger wave or a couple waves stacked back to back, and you sometimes move forward a step or you scurry backwards a step. The first waves, they may catch you a little off guard, hit you with some cold water down in your nether regions. And then sometimes the waves get stacked up and they pop you and they knock you ass over tea kettle. The difference between what the impact is of those waves as they start to hit is where you're standing and how closely you've been paying attention to what's coming. So that's all from Dieseldamus here on the first go round. Hope you enjoyed it. Hopefully you've got questions or thoughts or rebuttals or tell me I'm crazy. That may be true. But it seemed there were too many things, too many variables rattling around my head. I had to give them an escape path and I gave them a voice. Who knows, maybe I'll even give them an outfit going forward and you'll see more of Dieseldamus here soon. That's all for the money line this week. Up next, we've got our conversation with Todd Waldron, VP of Carrier Experience over at truckstop.com. I ran into him a few months back down in Kentucky at the Mid-America Truck Show. I had a great conversation with him. We talk a little bit about that, and we talk about some new features they've got on the way there over at truckstop.com. And then we'll catch you on the flip side for the post trip. We've got work to do. TrueTMS is a cloud-based transportation management system. Being in the cloud makes integrations faster, and you're able to access the platform from anywhere. It has intuitive planning, on-demand reporting, and easy order creation, rating, and invoices, which turns tedious admin work into streamlined automated workflows. The folks at TrueTMS have decades of trucking and liquid experience, and they care about this industry. They don't just sell you a product, they're invested in your success. Visit their website, truetms.com, and of course, tell them Channel 19 sent you.
More than anything, this show's about bringing back the sense of community we used to find on the CB, especially good old Channel 19. No rants, no corporate spin, just long-form storytelling from someone who's been behind the wheel, built the fleet, hit rock bottom, and climbed right back up.
All right, this week on the show, we've got a Minnesotan, a fellow Minnesotan special guest, Todd Waldron. It's funny, a person who we've probably orbited, our orbits have been probably pretty close to one another over the years, right in each other's backyard, but we kind of accidentally met one another down at Matt's, standing at the same booth, talking, listening to the same kind of pitch about product features from another company, and it turns out we're nearly neighbors. So welcome to the show, Todd. Nice to see you again.
Tony, it's great to be here. It's it's a small world in logistics, but yet can seem so big sometimes. But yeah, it was pretty funny when I'm like standing there talking to this vendor and Tony's up there peppering him with these strong operational questions. I'm like, man, this guy knows his stuff. And then we started talking after that, and it's been great to get to know you better since. So it's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, so my audience has heard a bit about my trucking story and the Minnesota roots of it, but let's hear about your logistics story and how you've come up through the business.
Yeah, absolutely. So I started my career at C.H. Robinson and worked in produce transportation brokerage. And so grew up in transportation brokerage, moving freight from the west to the northeast, produce off the west coast. So that was a great way to kind of cut my transportation teeth. I worked in account management and then also led a consolidation team, an LTL at CH as well. I moved over to JB Hunt then in about 2013, I want to say it was, and opened the brokerage branch for JB Hunt up in Minnesota. A couple years after that, relocated down to corporate down in Arkansas, where I worked on JB Hunt 360, marketplace development, and a lot of other fun stuff down there at corporate. Then I had the great opportunity. So I spent 6 years at Hunt, four of which were down in Arkansas, and then had the opportunity to come back up to Minnesota. And one of my good friends' dad had founded Q Carriers back in 1981, and was looking to retire again. And so my friend was gracious enough to consider me to be CEO and run the organization. So I stepped into that in 2019, where we led that through 2024, and ended up selling the organization or selling the company in 2024. So we're running about 115 trucks when I got there, refrigerated food and beverage, and then we had a brokerage division as well. And so that was a great run in transportation, and that the asset side of trucking and refrigerated trucking. And then I joined Truck Stop after we sold the organization in end of 2024. Had the opportunity. I knew Brent Hutto very well, and he was gracious enough to connect me. And yeah, I've been here since, and really been enjoying the technology side of things and looking at how can I take all of my 16 years in transportation and logistics background and apply technology to improve the lives of the people we interact with, particularly the drivers and the carriers. And so now, as Vice President of Carrier Experience here at Truck Stop, that's my sole focus: is how do we, as an organization, make a more streamlined product offering and processes that support the driver and that support the carriers in executing their business. And so it's been just a lot of fun to apply all that learning into solutions that can continue to improve the lives of the people we work with.
Right. Right. That's what it's all about, right? Learn
Yes.
some things, sometimes the hard way, sometimes the easy way, but and then come back and apply them and try to build a better value somewhere else with that information.
Yep. Absolutely.
Well, one thing I wanted to ask you before we jump into some of the truck stop features that have come out, with your background in brokerage in particular, and CH Robinson and JB Hunt, like one of the things I see get questioned a lot on the trucking social media sides is like, why can't we just get rid of brokers? Why, like they're just vipers. They're just stealing money from hardworking truckers. Like that we should just eradicate Earth from brokerages and 3PLs altogether. And I wanted, because you've worked on that
Yeah.
side much more than I have. Like you have, there's a sales pitch, right? I've been on the receiving
Yeah.
end.
Yeah.
I worked for
Sure.
Cargill and managed, flour milling for them for a little while, logistics, truck logistics. And so there's a sales pitch, right? There's a reason for these companies to exist, but you lived
Yep.
it for, a decade, more than a decade. So what's the pitch? Why did they exist?
Yeah, I could talk on this for days. But there's a few components to it I look at is one, yes, let's get this out of the way. There are bad performing, ill-intentioned brokers out there that are trying to take advantage or are not operating in a ethical way. As the same way as there's carriers and shippers that do the same thing as well,
Mm,
that are not operating in something that would be either ethically sound or also like respecting the needs of the other folks, right? And so if we separate that conversation for a minute and we look at the ones that are trying to better the industry and perform a service, the value of the broker has evolved over the last 10 to 15 years. People like C.H. Robinson has really pioneered this dedicated hands-on approach to brokerage where previously and many years ago it was really just a hands off. They were just passing the shipment on, making a margin, and then to the shippers, kind of hands on. I'm just the broker, you got to contact the carrier. And
mm,
so that evolved into a more hands-on service oriented approach. So one of the values of the brokers is to say, hey, I can provide an additional layer of communication and service that benefits the shipper but also benefits the carrier and the driver. So the driver doesn't have to worry about, making as many of the communications that shippers have come to expect in their daily lives. But one of the primary roles that brokerages have fit into the value component is aggregating the small carriers, the 1 to 5 trucks, and being able to vet and manage that level of carriers. Shippers were not able to effectively build a transportation team that could effectively utilize those carriers. So, one way to look at it is saying, as a smaller carrier, it's often incredibly difficult to get access to freight from those large shippers, and
mm,
brokers enable the ability to do that. So, if I can find a broker that cares about the how I move my truck, where I want to be, and respects me, and also advocates on behalf of me to the broker or to the shipper, there's a lot of health that can be found in that relationship. At Q Carriers at 115 trucks, right? We had our strategy of being shipper direct in the majority of our freight, but we would still utilize brokers and have good relationships with solid brokers where it made sense, whether it was for backhaul or it was for loose season times to fill maybe 15% of our head haul shipments. There was still that value in the relationships that they had and bringing that connection to the shippers that they might have been worked with. It's also evolved the technology space. Brokers have really developed a strong portfolio of technology, and there's new vendors that are providing a lot of technology to the brokers, so they can provide a level of data analytics as well as information and automation and things like that they're focused on in developing. And so that there's obviously some carriers that can do that too, but some of the smaller carriers don't always have the resources to add
Yeah.
all of those layers of technology. And so I think there's multiple aspects to it. The other thing I really hit on is the margin discussion. That at the end of the day, brokers aren't making some exorbitant amount of margin. Some are, but some might be
And
in
sometimes, like,
in
yeah.
a small window where you see a shipment that has a certain margin, but brokerage margin is managed throughout the year where there's ebbs and flows to that, especially those that are managing contracted freight. And so it's an incredibly difficult thing to price contracted business to a shipper to sustain through the year. And so there's a risk component to that also has to be managed within the brokerage margin. But the average margin might be 15% in the industry, but the net profitability or net margin is only in the 4 to 6% in a healthy performing brokerage or a fairly good state of brokerage. So
Yeah. And the brokers, like you said, they're providing a service, right? They're providing updates, just like a shipper. As a large shipper, when I was in that role, I didn't want to deal with 500 3-truck companies. When you're, a 30-truck company, excuse me, you also don't want to deal with 900 shippers just because that's how many different people you actually hauled freight for, right? So
yep.
there's a mutually beneficial helpfulness that the broker provides. And I think I'd like to say that I had a plan when I asked that question, more of a blind squirrel wandering around, but it has a direct relationship to what you're doing right now and the role that Truck
Yeah.
Stop plays in the industry, right? Of facilitating the ease of interactions, the safety of interactions, all those things.
Yep, absolutely. When you look at like from a brokerage standpoint too, the shipper has evolved where they used to have brokers just as an overflow model. But they realized is that if you have brokers on the routing guide in a sustainable, kind of long-term relationship, that you don't see the ebbs and flows and the peaks and valleys, they can smooth those out a little bit. But then you step into then the load board from like a truck stop perspective, which is one of the products and tools that we use to kind of help the relationship between brokers and carriers. Um, but that's another thing that sometimes will get a bad rap, right? And the noise often takes the external conversation because everybody's talking about that, whether it's the fraud or things that are happening. And fortunately, our load board has gotten very great reviews and feedback as far as not having the fraud present, on the load board. But that negative connotation, it's like a load board is a tool and a thing that can really support this relationship between brokers and carriers, and then can also introduce people into deeper levels of relationships. And so a lot of the tools and the releases that we're coming out with are saying, how can we have additional features that make this more beneficial to the carriers and the brokers and also the relationships and bringing them together. And so you'll see that in some of the features that we'll talk about that we're coming out with.
Yeah, let's start to talk about some of those features that you guys just came out with and how they help facilitate these sorts of things for both
Yeah.
sides of the equation, right? The whole logistics network benefits when everybody's operating as efficiently as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing that some brokers have requirements is a certain age, a tenure of authority, having your authority for a certain amount of time. And so one of the challenges we were seeing in our carriers is they would find a shipment and then call a broker and then run into this requirement and they might not meet that requirement. So we added an age authority age filter that allows a carrier to filter on showing them just loads and shipments that will work with their authority level. So if I have 6 months of authority, I can filter to see the brokers that will work with me's loads. So it saves a lot of time. We've gotten great feedback on this. It saves a lot of time in navigating where I'm at in my tenure as an organization or as a carrier, and who are the people that I'm going to work best with.
Yeah. And the primary driver around that is just with the amount of fraud that we're seeing in the industry, it's just people are leery. Certain everybody's got a different risk tolerance. And
Yep.
so, there are certain people who just say, you know what, 6 months, a year, whatever your age on your MC, um, you know, how long you've had it is a criteria that, they're going to set their policy for and kind of stick to that line, right?
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. And so, that's kind of one of the downfalls of, I mean, there's a lot of downfalls, but the downfalls for the good people that want to start a good, relevant, healthy business is that with the increase in fraud, there's a lot more skepticism that has then
Yeah.
impacted people's ability to start a trucking company or start, running their own truck. And so this is one way to help folks at least have manage and have visibility. And then the other thing I'm kind of working on trying to figure out is, well, how do we add legitimacy and some type of a footprint to those folks, the drivers that are new but have a long-standing history as a company driver at a certain company or something like that. How can we make that resume, if you will, more present and more, open to the brokers they want to work with, so you get the full picture? Because right
Yeah,
now you see
almost.
that authority age and it just looks like, oh, you're just new to this and you just bought a truck and decided to go hit the road, right? Like,
Yeah, you could have been an owner operator. You could have been a master contractor with 20 trucks under Landstar for
yep,
20 years.
yep,
But you go and fill out that, authority application and it looks like you just fell off the turnip truck, right? And
yep,
you're the new guy. Yeah, I mean
yep,
that's where it's interesting. You look at platforms like Reddit, for example, right?
yep,
And like you can set the basically the tolerance for your group that says you have to have so much air quotes karma, you have to have contributed so much to the group as like a guest or a commenter before we'll let you post anything because we don't want people just jumping in and spamming us with their,
famine, yep,
buy our insurance or buy our, fuel plan or whatever the case, right? So there's
yep.
almost like that kind of mafiosa, vouch for somebody to get them in the network, right?
Yeah, 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 absolutely. So yeah, that's one vein. Load popularity. Recognizing the challenge of competing for popular loads, and so this is meant to kind of show and assess the views on a shipment and externalize how many views are out there on a shipment, and see the ones that are going to be highly competitive or the ones that are going to be less competitive that might have a better chance at winning and getting in with a new broker or interacting with somebody. So that's kind of like just a visibility of to some of the data and activity happening, which is something we want to continue to do. A
There's
backhaul search.
nothing
Go ahead.
more disappointing than getting excited about a load. You found one and then, you don't realize that, yeah, 50 other people got the same feeling
Right, on
about
the
that
same
load. So
interest.
you better
Yep.
move fast, right?
Yep. 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 It gives you a sense of the timeliness to respond. Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure.
And then, I mean, there's a simple thing like backhaul search where we were seeing, people might search location A to B, and then search the inverse. And so we just inserted a swap button, right? Something simple, but just making it easier for them to interact with. So you can hit the swap button and it swaps it into searching for a backhaul.
Hmm.
So that was one thing. And then we've been talking a lot and working a lot on recommendations. Recommendations is a broad term. A lot of people use recommendations, load recommendations. And so the intuitiveness and how it works and interacts is really the key to it. And so one of the ones we rolled out was a similar load recommendations to look at, similar to what I've hauled in the past or what the carrier search criteria is. We want to help them discover more relevant opportunities. And then we're working on like a lane suggestions. So carriers will often search to anywhere, some will that have more flexible destinations. And so we're going to want to provide some suggestions that are loads that it might be the rate is better or the shipment has better characteristics or things like that. And so if you're searching to anywhere, we might say, hey, we want to highlight some of the suggested ones that we see that might be a better fit for you. And so just adding additional tools, intelligence research to kind of help make the search a little bit easier, because you'll often there's often a lot of loads that can return on results. And so we want to just highlight ones that we think would be a great fit for you.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the challenges, right? Of, a long time ago when I started, when you started, the tools were very minimal. And I
Yep.
was going to ask you about like how does your team or you go about looking at some of these? Because right, you can add a million features, right? A million search criteria, and now you got like 3 pages to scroll through of where was
Yes.
that search and how do I do a semicircle radius search that faces to the east out of Memphis, things like that.
Yep.
How do you, so the complexity of all the things that people ask for, and but also trying to make it so that the software is still actually usable and doesn't drive people nuts.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's a lot that goes into that. Is we have a lot of mediums for gaining customer feedback, right, and getting thoughts and ideas, whether it's an NPS survey or it's an in-app feedback experience, or we have some forms that are even a simple way to provide feedback. And so we have a process for collecting all of that, and then the committees that discuss and talk about what that feedback relates to, whether it's a process where it could be in the customer service vein, it could be in the sales vein or some other vein, or it could be in the product side. And how do we, one, communicate to understand with that person that provided the feedback, but then two, incorporate it or see where it fits on the product roadmap and see how it aligns. And then from there, it really takes on a life of its own in trying to say what are the details. I always say in transportation, the devil's in the details. And so an idea, like you get a title of a product or something, and it's like that's a great idea, but then something X, Y, and Z could make it so it's not even relevant to the driver
Yeah.
because we didn't account for that. And so there's that's a part of my role too, is stepping in and saying, okay, as we dig into releasing this product, what are the specifications we're building into it? How's it going to look? Where does it live in the workflow? And how does it interact with the rest of the product and the rest of the features? And does this deliver the value that the person who gave the feedback intended it to deliver? Is the things that you have to connect, because
Yeah.
scope creep and everything else in technology development can often take you on this path where you end up way over here and you're like, well, this is so and so feature, and you're like, yeah, but the person who recommended this meant this,
Yeah, they
but
was trying to solve a
we've
totally different problem.
slowly evolved into this. Yes.
Yeah.
And so that's where I love being a part of that. And so that involves not only us talking through it, but then also reaching out to folks and carriers we work with and relationships we have to get their feedback and input. And so that's a big part of the process as well.
So what challenges that, especially on the carrier side, and from the one truck owner operator to the smaller carriers, like what are the things that you guys are working on coming up next to continue to make their experience the best possible one you can provide?
Yeah, we have a lot coming up and a lot we're working on. And so as we release, Scott Moskrept, our founder, stepped back in as
Yeah.
interim CEO and is really pushing a fast pace of product delivery and saying and customer focused and how we listen to and react to our customers. So there's a lot happening on our product side. Some of the things are the lane suggestions I mentioned coming up, factorability data, the ability for a factoring customer to be able to see which brokers are factorable, which not only tells you which ones you can factor against, but it also gives financial legitimacy to brokers because you know that they've gone through some financial approval process by a factoring company to be able to get that banner or that mark.
Right.
And then also like RMIS, our vetting and onboarding software, the ability to be able to see which loads are posted by brokers I'm already onboarded with. And so now I can see, wait, who am I going to have to go through the onboarding process with again versus who am I already set up with? And being able to see that in the load board is another feature. So you'll see those are just some examples of the things that are coming down the pike that are like, we continue to take out the friction between the carriers and the brokers, as well as enable a deeper level of trust and truth to happen in that. And so the more information that's relevant to being able to interact together, and so there's a lot more happening from there. Yeah, it's gonna be a lot of fun. You're gonna see a lot of innovation and new things continuing to come from us here in the coming months. So
Yeah, and from a practical level, right? I mean, when as a driver, as an owner operator waiting on dispatch, you know, you're sitting around going, why the heck is it taking so long? Or I get the dispatch, hey, I got a load, just give me a minute and I'll get you the details. And then 3 hours later, you're still sitting there twiddling your thumbs, right? These are some of the things that
yep,
are create the thumb twiddling moments that
tension.
you're trying
Yep,
to pull that time out of there and go, hey,
yep,
we already know each other. I already know that you have some financial credibility, so I'm not sitting here hemming and hawing doing. I mean, now, before you might be calling your friends, but now you might be Googling, looking for bad reviews. Is this broker gonna stiff
yeah.
me? All that kind of stuff. Or these guys crooks? You get that instantaneous feedback. You can move on faster and get people doing what they, makes money in this business.
Yep. And that's the thing that perpetuates the negative relationship,
Hmm.
because your narrative starts to be they're screwing me, they're looking for a lower carrier to pay, they're looking for somebody else, which could be the truth, but coming from and sitting in that broker seat, the things that can happen or go wrong, whether it's technology and I didn't get the rate confirmation, or the paperwork, or there's an issue with the paperwork, or there's a system issue in getting it approved. It's like there's a slew of things, or shipper wants to change the load but didn't tell you this, and you're trying to confirm, but they won't answer their phone, and you're trying to, and so it's like I always say, like, assume good intent. There could be something that's a positive or negative that's happening behind the scenes, but assume good intent,
Yeah,
and see how communication can help enable that. And so from a broker's perspective, I would always teach over communicate. If you're having an issue with the insurance or the this person that you're trying to work on, communicate that to the carrier, so that they know you're working on it. In the same way, like in customer service, if I send an email to customer service, getting a response that it was received is so, like, it's mind easing. In the same way that carriers and brokers work together and everything, is some
yeah,
people would receive these and just sit and think that the other person should assume they're working on it. And
yeah,
that's just not how communication should be handled. It's like over communicate, less assumptions, no assumptions. It really helps to say, hey, let's give each other the benefit of the doubt and not assume negative intent until that person proves us wrong in doing something that actually, um, is proven to be a not good business practice.
right. Yeah, and I mean it's funny, right? Last week I was talking with Danger Dave because he had a myriad of breakdowns on his load from I forget where he was coming out of. I think it was somewhere down by Texas, going up to Buffalo, New York, and he made it to Nashville, and it was breakdown after breakdown, the record breakdown, he'd break down, then he'd go
Yeah.
50 miles up the
Yep.
road, check engine light comes on, and the thing, it's funny, like his commentary mirrored your commentary, which was over communicate, don't assume, if you're upfront and explain things to people, like these things happen. And yeah, can we still
Yep.
get frustrated or, impatient or have things that you need to get done? Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
But what all those things help do is root out those assumptions, the erroneous assumptions,
Yeah.
and get everybody on the same page. Because just like
Yeah.
if you're a driver, there's a lot to navigate to make a load happen. It's not just, Chicago to Kansas City and, it's 8 hours of peace and joy,
Yeah.
right? Um, the flip side is also true that just because the person hit the send button on a dispatch to your truck doesn't mean that they have 8 hours of peace and joy on the
Yeah.
paperwork, on the updating, on
Absolutely.
all the other things, right? Or the brokers in the same shoes, right? There's a lot of
Yeah.
stuff that goes on that you just don't see. And quite frankly, everybody should be happy you don't have to see it or participate in it as little as possible. That's what tools
Yeah.
like you're talking about help facilitate, right?
Yeah.
As a driver, I
Yeah.
don't want to know, hey, I don't want to hear their sob story about, well, we did this with this broker that doesn't seem to pay us and,
Yep.
or, has ghosted us now or, everybody benefits from good, transparent, data-rich relationships that are as easy as possible for everybody.
Absolutely. And it goes both ways. A good friend of mine runs a trucking company in northern Minnesota, just posted on LinkedIn about this interaction with a broker that they had a legitimate truck breakdown, was in the shop, could prove it, et cetera, et cetera. They notified as soon as they found out, right? They did all of the right things. And then the broker comes back and says they're going to enter a freight guard on them. And it's like, eh, you can't just go from 0 to 60 and assume everybody's bad and trying to cheat the system just because we have so much of that fraud and mistrust happening. It's like let's take a breather on both sides and try to get the positive, great people working together in positive ways. And that's something that really drives and motivates me is being in brokerage, being in asset, and being in carriers inside of things. Is like there's a purpose and healthiness to these two different roles in the industry. And I'm just like, how do we make this more enjoyable for both sides? Transportation's a tough
Yeah,
business, but
it
you know,
is.
our vision became at Q Carriers delivering an enjoyable transportation experience. And everybody, when I brought up enjoyable, everybody was looking around the room like, this is trucking, man. But I'm like, wait a minute, like you no matter our shop, our director of the shop said, raises their trucks are broken down when they come to me. What's enjoyable about that? I said, if you asked every one of these drivers when their trucks broke down where the shop they want to bring their truck to, they'd be able to name a shop because that shop was respectful, billed them correctly, treated them well.
Mhm.
Something made, in spite of the circumstance being poor, made it a more enjoyable experience than it could have been. And so it's like that's what it's all about for me is like, how do we continue to make this more enjoyable? Because it's such a necessary component of our economy, but yet it can be just so challenging in many ways to just execute and make things happen. So,
Yeah. And it's in those toughest moments, like your friend, the carrier, it's in
yep,
those toughest moments where you have the opportunity to build the strongest bonds if you're open to it, right? Because
absolutely.
you don't have that much trust with somebody. It trust builds pretty slow if everything goes okay, right?
Yep,
There's nothing extraordinarily good, nothing extraordinarily bad. Okay, if you do that 1,000 times, then I start to trust, or 100 times, or whatever
yep,
your magic number is. Okay, then we have a certain level of trust. But if we went
yep,
through something tough together, and I know how you react in tough situations, and that you're communicative and respectful, and all those things in the goofy scenarios that pop up in trucking all the time,
yep.
I know a lot more about you a lot faster than any other way.
Yes, I've built so many stronger relationships that were in a very negative situation with like shippers or carriers, but the way you handle and they see your dedication through that can really turn those into even more positive relationships.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And sometimes you got to be tough. There are times for that in this business, but there's also a lot of times for grace and being generous. That
Yes.
that you can build a lot and gain a lot in the long run, right? And I
Yep.
think that kind of goes circling back to kind of where you started too, which was around just the difference between the people who are out for a one-time gain as fast as possible and the actors who are actually trying to build something mutually beneficial. Because that broker who thinks he may be doing himself a solid by, putting a fleet guard on a particular carrier, he actually just shrunk his available capacity for his business in the future, and
Yep. Yep.
he's likely costing himself money.
Yep. Absolutely. It's a short-term mindset, short-term mentality.
Yeah, just for an
Yeah.
emotional response, most likely over something that was frustrating or
Yep.
And yes, brokers take heat. I was on the shipper side and and CH Robinson was one of my vendors, my
Yeah.
3PLs out of Topeka. And,
Yeah.
there were times when I gave them hell,
Yeah.
but there was also times they bailed me out of 1,000 icky
Yeah.
scenarios of, you know, and a lot of it's like bailing people out of scenarios that are actually good things like hey, our customers ordered way more than we could have planned for. We have way
Yeah.
more freight to haul. Can you help? Right? Like
Yep.
those are the bailouts that are good, right? The salesman's over
Yep.
there, they're high-fiving each other. We did it. We got some more sales, and we're over there going, "Oh my God, like what do you think trucks grow on trees?" But they kind of do when you have
Yeah.
a partner who's
Yeah.
got access to a much bigger network than you have organically, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
So,
There's a lot of value in that.
so there's the lesson today. Trucks do grow on trees. No, man. Well, it was great talking to you. I love hearing about your new features. I hope to get you back, as more stuff comes out and talk about, where Truck Stop's going and all the cool stuff you bring to the marketplace especially for, the carriers, because that's what your focus is on.
Absolutely. Would love to. I appreciate you having me on. It's been great chatting.
Thanks.
We're talking trucking life, uncut. The wild stuff, the weird stuff, the mistakes, the memories, and the miles in between. From first jobs to last hauls, the laughs that kept us going, and the lessons that left a mark.
Quick reminder to pay a visit to friends of the show on social media. Big Cal's trucking. Wait, hold on. Breaking news this week. There's been a name change. It's now Trucking with Coffee and Cal. So go check out Big Cal over there. Page is the same, but if you haven't been there yet, you're going to have to search a different way. It'll be Trucking with Coffee and Cal. Superior Trucking Payroll Service. Be sure to visit Mike Ritzum over there and check out all his information. He's been kicking out a lot of social media stuff this last couple weeks, so a lot of fun he's been having with content there. Also, we've gotten ourselves into a couple interesting conversations around per diem, evidently. There's dissension in the ranks of the trucking community about per diem. I guess some folks would rather pay more in taxes so that their income line on their 1040 EZ form is higher. Not sure how that math works out, but I know Mike's fighting the good fight out there wherever he can. Be sure to visit I-95 Truckers. Support Al on social media. He's always supporting us. We need to get Little Brother Trucker or Danger Dave over there so we can get some live action photos of those guys trucking, not just these still photos they keep posting. So go check out Al's page over there, I-95 Truckers. Trans Carolina Permits, they've been putting a lot of fun posts up lately. Also, Sheet Trucking, the organization of Sheree Moore. I read her poem last week on the program. And also, I just got her book delivered while I was away this last week. So we've got a holiday weekend coming up to get some extra reading time in. So I'll be letting you know how that book goes. Speaking of which, yes, I'm back in Arizona just in time for 114-degree weather. So that sizzle on your toes on the asphalt lets you know that you're home. We've got the holiday weekend, 4th of July coming up here this coming Friday. Get those flags out, dodge those RVs and tourists out there. Make sure you get home safely. Make sure you come back to work afterwards with as many fingers that you started with. I'm almost there on the new website, and we'll have some new etiquette segments to release along when the website comes out. I keep saying that, man. I'm close. I just got it now. It's almost all on me now to make sure I get all the ducks in a row. My wife did a great job helping me test it, making sure all the links actually went somewhere and corrected all my spelling and grammar errors. So, with a little bit of help, maybe even I could pass an English language proficiency examination. Also on the website, you'll see a couple new releases of things where I'm aggregating a bunch of trucking industry information, like other trucking podcasts, trucking songs, trucking movies, trucking books, trucking products, things to make your life easier on the road. So, of course, I'll be looking for y'all's input on the things that I'm missing. Big Cal, that means you, buddy. I know you've got all kinds of movie recommendations to throw at me, so we'll have a spot to put those out there. We can share them with the world. Summer show season's in full swing, of course. Check out the website, thetruckshowlist.com. Southern Idaho Truck Show was going on this weekend. Actually, there was lots of shows this past weekend. I recall seeing a couple different ATHS, American Truck Historical Society. I joined them as a member here in the last week, too, so shout out to me for being a member of the American Truck Historical Society. I've also got my stuff all booked, my hotels and flights and all that stuff to head up to the Walcott Jamboree. That's coming up here in 2 weeks. So up in Iowa, just west of the Quad Cities there, Davenport. I'll be there all day on Friday. I was thinking I probably only ever stopped there maybe a couple times. in all the years. No particular reason why. It's just a lot of trucks and a lot of traffic. That wasn't really a spot where I was gonna stop to do anything, or at least spend the night or anything like that. So I'm excited. I'm gonna actually get to go have enough time to take a look around and admire some of the things there that I'm pretty sure when I went there before, I don't even think I've ever eaten there. I just bought fuel there a couple times in and out. So that'll be fun. There's plenty more shows to check out this summer. TheTruckShowList.com will tell you where they're all at and when they are. Oh, speaking of shows, that reminds me of my favorite trucking term of the week. My wife and I, we went to the theater to see a play on Friday night, The Scarlet Pimpernel. Evidently, it's a flower. It's a play about the French Revolution. It was decent, had some funny moments, but the trucking term that I heard this week was compliance theater. The act put on to make it look like compliance and safety is actually happening to comply with nonsense government regulations. So there you've got a new word. I've tied it all together for the show. I tied together truck shows, going to the theater, and compliance all into one. Compliance theater. I'm sure little brother trucker he'll like that one. He'll find a way to use that in a sentence this week. That puts a bow on things for this week. Be sure to keep reaching out if you'd like to be on the program. Like, follow, comment, subscribe, leave us a review. Email us at inbox@channel19experience.com. There's also a contact form on the website. Keep sharing the show with your friends. Thanks for listening. See you all next week. We've got work to do.
This has been the Channel 19 Experience. If it's about trucking, we're talking about it. All uncut. The wild stuff, the weird stuff, the mistakes, the memories. But we talk about the world of trucking today, too. Everything from legislation to lane changes in the industry. We got it covered. Thanks for listening to the show. If you enjoyed it, make sure to like, rate, and review. We'll be back at the ranch soon, but in the meantime, hit us up on social media at Channel 19 Experience and the website at www.channel19experience.com. That's channel and the numbers 19. See you down the road.